Alrighty, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Today we are very fortunate to have Dr. Stephen Smith from MIT Lincoln Laboratory, and he's going to be discussing his work on reconnaissance of influence operations. Dr. Smith is a senior staff member in the Artificial Intelligence and Software Architecture and Algorithms group at MIT Lincoln Laboratory. He is an expert in radar, sonar, and signal processing, and he's made a number of pioneering and wide-ranging contributions through his research and technical leadership in estimation theory, resolution limits, and signal processing and optimization on manifolds. He has over 20 years experience as an innovative technology leader in statistics and data analytics, both in theory and practice, and broad leadership experience ranging from first-of-a-kind algorithm development for groundbreaking sensor systems to graph-based artificial intelligence architectures. In his role as senior staff, he's essentially reached the highest level that you can at MIT Lincoln Lab. So we are very lucky to have him here to give a talk. Dr. Smith has indicated that he is open to questions during his talk. So if you have one, feel free to raise your hand and we'll try to get you unmuted. Again, just as a quick heads up, this seminar series is supported through the Department of Homeland Security and NCITE. Anything we say here is not representative of the policies or positions of DHS or of NCITE. So just, quick heads up on that. And before we move forward with Dr. Smith's talk, I do want to invite everybody to attend next week's talk from Dr. Todd Helmuth from RAND. And he's going to be talking about countering violent extremism in the military. So with that, I want to kick off our presentation and hand it over to Stephen Smith. Thank you very much. And Dr. Smith, it's all yours.
Okay, great. And thank you very much for the invitation, Adan and Ravi. And I'm very happy to be here and discuss this subject. And I will say, by the way, before I start sharing my screen, when I do encourage participation and questions, but I'll say, personally, when I start giving the talk, I'll be in the zone, so I'll rely on you, Adan, to alert me this, and we're on Zoom, so I can't scan the audience for who's eager to ask a question. So I cannot start sharing the screen while the other participant is sharing. So I'm guessing, there you go, hold on. Okay. Okay, are we good? Great. Okay, so my talk this afternoon is on our project, the reconnaissance of influence operations. And so I want to start out by describing our understanding of what influence operations are. Pretty straightforward. Influence operations are to influence a target audience, and whether it be their behaviors, their actions, their attitudes, and this is a very, influence operations is a very old thing. We have our modern interpretations of it, and we have our own, I'd say our own biased view of it, from the perspective of the U.S. and our allies. We would certainly like to promote our own positions. We'd like to promote strong relationships with our allies, defend ourselves and democracies. And we live in a rule-based, law-based society, and so we'd like to maintain peace and stability. And I'd say, our adversaries have their own position in this. And again, this is, I'll admit this, maybe my own biased view, and they have their own perspective. And I don't want to discount that, because that's important to understand an influence operation. But, describing, the biased view of our adversaries, their objectives in influence is, depending on who it is, they would like to undermine U.S. influence, and weaken NATO and alliances that they perceive to be against their interests. If they're not democracies, attack democracies, and use techniques to achieve this. And those techniques might be inciting local unrest. And so, and this is this is not a modern thing. This is an ancient thing, and this is not going to be a history lesson. But the big thing that's new here now is there's the internet, and there's cell phones and the internet in everybody's pockets. And so the theater now is this information environment, and all the magnified speed and scale and reach that go along with that. And so, obviously this has been in the news a lot, especially in the last 5 years. It's been in the news a lot, with congressional hearings just last week, and will continue to be in the news. So, influence operations are occurring all the time, all around the world. They happen in the US and takes lots of forms: election meddling, basically promoting discord and fear. I'll have some examples of that. We're still in a pandemic. Don noticed that I was in the office today, and so that's starting to become normal for me, but things are still disrupted. There's a lot of conspiracy theories, misinformation about vaccines and health, promoting divisions, whether in this country or abroad, publications explicitly used for influence operations and organizations to do that. And it's not basically, the channels now are quite inexpensive, so you can spread this stuff all over the place. So, stuff goes on in Western Europe. I'll be talking about an example that we studied in the French elections a few years ago, but there's stuff happening in the Baltics, the Balkans, the Ukraine, the Middle East, Asia. This is a very broad issue. So I'll just be able to touch on a little bit of it here, but it is a worldwide issue, and certainly affects us and our interests. And so, well, it's a world issue. It's also a local issue, and I'll just relate a real world event of an influence operation that was very minor, but still has some interesting aspects of it to it that I'd like to highlight. And so there was I live in the Boston area, and just north of Boston, there's what's called an economically disadvantaged community, Lynn, Massachusetts. And sometimes stuff goes on there that's associated with that. And so there is an incident, double shooting, reported in Lynn. This was tweeted out by the New England cable news network, and they basically said, "Hey, there's been a double shooting reported in Lynn. More details as they arrive. Here's our link." And then, so this was online on Twitter, and then so people picked this up. And then the first time this was picked up was from this account, and it was pretty much a straight account of what was being reported online at the time. 2 people shot, 1 dead in Lynn. Here's a link, and it was the link of this NECN thing. So fine, just the facts. That's too bad. Stuff happens. Here's the link. But then this other account jumped on and also reported this, but distorted it in several important ways. So it wasn't like just this thing happened and more news as it comes, but breaking siren emoji alert thing. Active, this wasn't a thing that happened. Now it's an active shooter in Lynn, and not 2 people shot, 2 dead, many more injured. What is going on? Question mark, question mark, question mark. And so And so this was all going on social media. And if you look at the timelines, this was all within a few hours of the actual event. And then an attempt was made to take this off of Twitter and post it on the regular web. So this was posted, now this is by a real person who's a writer for Sputnik News. And they tried to integrate two different events, bloody, and call it that day, Bloody Sunday, active shooters in Massachusetts and Ohio, and really make it look like, there's a lot of, so chaos, division, you need to be afraid. There's all this stuff going on. Nobody's in charge, be afraid. And so that's kind of where this incident ended. But I'd like you to take note of the author of this disinformation post, Pamela Moore, 13, and Cassandra Fairbanks. They will show up later in a different narrative. And this isn't like, basically stuff like this is going on all the time because of the issues of, scale and reach we talked about, and a lot of stuff doesn't hit, some stuff does. And, the idea here, and as an active strategy, the idea here is to pump out a lot of stuff, and occasionally you'll hit it big, and, that's what this is all about. And so we were observing all of this in the 2015-2016 timeframe for a different project, and we observed that we thought we had some ideas that could contribute to this, and thought that this was an area where country needed help, and so we wanted to. We started a small seedling to understand not just the problem of disinformation, but also its context in asymmetric or gray zone warfare. And so sort of the first thing you do in this kind of thinking and is understand what your adversary's chain of action is, or what's called an OODA loop, and to figure out what's going on and get in there and break it. And there's 4 basic stages here: observe, and this is what we do. This is what our adversaries do. So they want to observe, and so they want to observe a host country, orient themselves, try to figure out what sort of narratives might useful, test things out, see how they do, decide what actions to take, what are we going to use, what are we going to abandon, and then act, post things. And also on defense, you sort of want to be doing the same thing. You want to look at what's going on, what narratives are being pushed out there by disinformation networks, try to figure out why they're doing it, when and why, and then decide how you're going to respond to that action, and then take a list of things you can do and act on it. And so in this space, because of the data size problem and pretty much the real-time nature of it, is there's a whole bunch of challenges to this. And so in this talk, I'm going to talk about reconnaissance here. Just observe and orient, figure out what's going on. And so that's what this project is going to be about. We have some ideas about how some of the technology will apply over in this space, but I'll just talk about reconnaissance here to figure out what's going on. So I'll start out with an approach to observing and orienting. Our input here is social media and news media data sources. We have a targeted collection of stuff that we think is relevant. And by the way, I'm saying this is a very small scale research effort. If we were an investment bank, which we're not, we would have the resources like to purchase the entire Twitter data hose. and get all of it. But there's no, most of that we don't care about, don't need it. And so we get to just use the Twitter public API to get very specific things. And this is Twitter focused, although disinformation happens on a lot of different platforms, but especially for research, Twitter makes is ideal for studying this problem for several different reasons. One of a primary reason is that there's a lot of signal on Twitter, and so there is a lot of activity on Twitter, and they do have this great public API for their own business model. So that makes it an ideal way to study the problem. So we collect things that we care about, and it could be narratives like the French election we talked about, or it could be narratives about chaos going on. But with the Twitter API and the keys, public API keys they provide, you can get a lot of relevant data just with the public feeds. Then we apply some natural language processing techniques and most of that data is completely irrelevant. And so we need to filter that down. So we apply natural language processing to look for narratives that we might care about. And so we're looking for things that are topically and semantically related to what we care about. Then we have trained up a classifier of accounts that appear to be IO accounts based on existing data sets, and I'll get into the details of that. And then we have we go through a process of network discovery where we try to look at who's involved in those narratives, what are particularly interesting accounts, and map out networks and try to get more narratives. There's a little feedback loop here, and then ultimately we care about of influence operation narratives, which accounts or networks are particularly effective at influencing others. And so we have developed a network causal inference approach to this that I will get to in detail. And so the first part of this is targeted collection and narrative detection, pardon me. And so I already spoke a little bit about this. If people have questions, I'd say this is pretty much a vanilla Twitter API, collect a bunch of data, and I would say a pretty standard natural language processing approach for being able to filter down to specific narratives. So we've tailored this to the specifics of these two things to the specifics of this project. I can answer questions either here or later for people interested, but I'd like to get to the, I think, really interesting specifics of account classification and influence estimation. And so account classification. So now what you'd like to do is you've got all these narratives, might be an IO narrative, and might be a anti-vax narrative, whatever it is. And what you'd like to do is automate detection of IO accounts, because there's still lots and lots of accounts talking about this stuff. And influence operations is about influence. A lot of innocent people that have nothing to do with state-sponsored disinformation campaigns get caught up in this stuff. And especially in this country, First Amendment, Fourth Amendment, all that stuff is, right? It's just the idea here is to go after non-U.S. state-sponsored influence operations account. And so how might you classify those? And so one, if you own your own network like Twitter does, they get to see everything, IP addresses, the whole, all of the data coming in and out. And so they have a very nice, they've released a bunch of public data sets that are very helpful in this problem of stuff that they can see. and releasing called the Twitter Elections Integrity Dataset. And that provides a great deal of data on who they believe are influence operations account. So so we're not Twitter. We don't have those great insights. All we can see is the data that's publicly available on the internet. And so what you can do is you can take your own collection that's publicly visible on Twitter, and you can take the stuff that Twitter is labeled and develop a classifier to classify IO accounts. And then you can apply that classifier to other accounts. And I will say that, Twitter is, they have released these nice data sets, but as, I mean, you don't have to be online too long to realize, that Twitter and other social media companies are only getting a fraction of this stuff. So there's a lot of other stuff out there that is highly relevant. So you can take a classifier you train up on using their labeled data and apply it to other accounts and try to identify other accounts that are potentially interesting, or just try to apply it to Twitter labeled accounts and see how well the classifier does. And so I would say this is a both a practical step of classifying IO like accounts. I'm not, I'm a researcher, so I'm not it's not my job to say, hey, this is a state-sponsored IO account. But I would like to be able to say is that I could train a classifier that it consistently identifies accounts that others have labeled IO accounts, or that a reasonable person would might characterize as such. And so so we did the standard machine learning thing. Is you train up a bunch of likely useful classifiers in this context, look at performance, choose the best performing one, both with ROC curves and robustness, and use that as your classifier. You can also, with some of the classifiers like tree classifiers, you can pull out top features, and so I've shown some of them here in this word cloud or feature cloud. And so then the question is, how good is your classifier? And so what I've shown here is this classifier. This is a cross-validated classifier on Twitter labeled data. So what you do is you train this up. You train this up a bunch of times where you withhold some of the labeled data, and then you apply to the labeled data. You test on the labeled data you didn't train on, so you're doing things fairly, and you compute a bunch of precision recall curves and take the average, and then that's your average performance. And then the area under that curve is like a good overall statistic performance metric of how well you're doing. And the two metrics here are recall. Recall here is how much of the stuff that is out there did you actually detect? And so for signal processors out there, that's probability of detection. If it was an actual IO account, did you detect it or not? So you want a high recall. Recall close to 1, very, very good. But if you set your recall close to 1 and you get them all, you also might get a lot of false positives. And so precision is how much of what fraction of the things you said were IO accounts actually were IO accounts, and that's precision. And so you would like it to be that your precision is 100%. Everything you said is an IO account or IO-like account actually is IO according to some authority, and here the authority is Twitter. And you'd like those to be both 1, they never are 1. And so the curve you get is your performance. And so here we're getting what in when you do machine learning stuff, you get very excited when you see a curve like this because it's working great. So you go, oh, it's working great. I must have overtrained, must have done all these cheating things that I didn't think of. So you throw a bunch of rocks at it, and if it withstands all the rocks, you get pretty confident. And you look at example outputs of what it's classifying, and try to do some subjective measures. And so I'd say this is passed all those tests, and we're quite confident and that this is a classifier with a level of performance that's interesting and relevant. So this is high, this is good. So this is something we're proud of and celebrated. So so we've got a decent classifier that can classify IO counts. Okay, great. Oh, and so before I move on to the next things, there's also bot detectors out there. So there's a few of them online. There's Botometer, there's Bot Sentinel, or Botometer. I think it's, I always get it wrong. Botometer, I think is the right pronunciation. So to the best we could, we compared this classifier that we trained up on content and metadata from IO, and non-IO accounts that we were able to collect and train against Twitter's elections integrity data set against these other classifiers. And we observe, using the best metric that we could do, is that our precision was significantly higher than these things. And so I think there's a few caveats here. So caveat one is these are not look at the names. These are not IO classifiers. They're bot classifiers. They're going after a different thing, and so bots are a part of IO. Perhaps a more important and larger part are managed accounts that are not automatically generating content, but have a person controlling them. So that's an important distinction. And there's some other differences, but also it's not a secret that there's some limitations to the accuracy of online stuff, and there's there are publications out there that evaluate the performance of these things, and I would say that this result is consistent with other published evaluations that we've seen of this stuff. So we're I'd say compared with what else is out there, we're pretty confident with this approach to classification for IO accounts. So for network discovery, there's a lot of ways you can do this. The way I'm going to describe an approach, and we can talk about alternates. I'm viewing a lot of this as a proof of concept, like let's try some obvious smart things to try, and then then that gives us a baseline of comparisons for other smart things one might do. For Twitter, a thing you might do if you're talking about a particular narrative is, hey, let's just look at the retweet network. And then you have to infer that, because you're not actually looking at retweets, you have to infer that over narratives. And so we're not necessarily looking at retweets of we're looking at retweets of specific tweets, but the way we build out a network is we use natural language processing to identify what content is part of a narrative. And then if that narrative is retweeted from one account to another, then that they're part of a narrative network. And so that's the approach that we've taken to network discovery and definition of narrative network in this case. And there are others, but we think this is a good baseline to think about. And so the idea here is there's some disinformation that gets posted by an account, and then other accounts pick that up and retweet it, and then it spreads across the network. Okay, now finally, influence operations, or excuse me, influence estimation. And so, so you could say, hey, there's no challenge there. We've got all these metrics for influence estimation. We could look at retweets, or, we'll use, basically like, Google's PageRank, which is basically the scientific citation index, who's put stuff out there, and we're going to count how much stuff it spreads or who's popular. And so there's all these various metrics to do that. And so our criticism of that count-based or topology-based approach is it doesn't really get at the real nature of the problem here. Is that a good influencer in a lot of context does not want to be like the most screaming, popular, obvious node out there in the network. They want to get their stuff out there and get it picked up and propagate it and spread. So there's count statistics don't get at that kind of causality, and they certainly are not going to get at if somebody is, though visible, not the most visible, or the most spreading the most content in a particular narrative. So there's a real, I think, disconnect between popular metrics for inferring influence, which may be great if you're an ad network, like getting those influencers, getting a YouTube influencers is where you want to be. There's kind of a disconnect here between that and actual influence operation. So how do you define who is influential given that reality? And so the approach that we're going to take here is one built off a statistical approach called causal inference. And so the quick background there is, the quick background on causal inference comes, there's a lot of applications, but one application everybody's familiar with is basically measuring efficacy of medicine. Is FDA needs to approve a drug, and a person takes the drug and they get better, and yay. So, and then, but how do you know you wouldn't have got, people are robust by and large. How do you know you wouldn't have gotten better anyway? What did the drug cause you to get better? How do you know it wasn't the drug? How do you know? And so there's a missing data problem there. I took the drug. I didn't not take the drug. So, so the approach that's been built up is in the statistics community is called causal inference. And so what you do is you look over a large population and you randomize it properly, and you look at people who took the drug and don't take the drug, and you infer what the cause of people taking that drug is over a large population, and draw statistical inferences over the effectiveness of taking that drug. And so, and you infer causality. And so, and there's a bunch of obvious things here that you want to be careful of, and both in the basic sense is you can't mix up correlation and causation, and when you extend this to networks, there's an exposure bias effect you have to be careful about. Like maybe you were in a community that everybody was taking that drug, and then maybe there was something about that community that taking that drug had no effect, and you just, or maybe it was differences in men versus women, or different ethnic groups, or whatever it was, is you need to disentangle all these possible bias effects. And so my colleague Ed Gao developed this network causal inference framework with Don Rubin, who was the father, one of the fathers of causal inference. And so, and then, so Ed worked out all these ideas in his PhD dissertation, and then came back to the lab and applied them in this context of influence estimation, inferring causality in networks. And so I'll give some of the math behind this. And, but before I do, everything I'm going to say is basically, if you're of a certain age, there was a shampoo commercial, I think it was Breck, where they made fun of that in the Mike Myers film. Anyway, it was you use the shampoo and you like it, and then I told two friends and they told two friends, and so on and so on. And so that is an example of network causal inference. But again, it's the basic missing data problem of, well, what happens if you didn't tell two friends? Would that narrative of the great shampoo have spread anyway? How do you know? So we're going to use a model to figure out how you know. And so in causal inference, you care about something called a potential outcome. And the potential outcome here is going to be, did you retweet this disinformation narrative? And there's the source is where you got it from, and it also depends on what your influence network is, which in our case is that retweet network that we can observe. And then rather than some count statistic about retweets or followers or page rank or whatever, our causal inference score is going to be how much stuff of this narrative got retweeted because a particular account tweeted it, like how much follow-on is there versus how much stuff would there have been had that account not tweeted it at all. And then you take the average of that over the entire network, and that's your causal influence score. So that's the metric. Stuff caused by the account minus stuff that would have been there had the account not tweeted, averaged over the network. Well, missing data problem. How do you know what would have been there? So here we resort to a model because we have to, because we have a missing data problem here. And so our model has a bunch of, we claim, reasonable steps. There's an exposure, reasonable components. There's an exposure to source component. And so there's like a baseline there. There's a baseline term, and then there's a n-hop out term. And then there's a what are called confounding possibilities. And so these are parts of the model that say, hey, you're part of a community that would have been, using great shampoo anyway, or, talked about this narrative anyway, or whatever, whatever it is. And so we do our best with the observables we have to address these confounders. And so stuff that goes in here are things we observe about the network, auxiliary data, community membership, and so forth. And that goes in these big vectors. Then we have all this data. We have a Bayesian model. We train up this, we basically train up this model with Markov chain Monte Carlo. We impute the model that gives us a probability of all this stuff. Now we've trained up this, this MCMC model. Now we can infer what would have happened. We've solved our missing data problem through Markov chain Monte Carlo and inference. And so we plug this in, and this allows us to compute a influence estimation score. And so great in theory. How does it work with real data? And so we went out, when we started this project, we wanted to get real data with like real world state actor influence operators in it. And this was early in 2017. we anticipated that this would definitely happen in the April French elections that year. And so we built up a targeted collection capability to look for French election related narratives. And so we got a lot of data on the French elections to be able to do this. And so and as it turned out, there was like this screamingly obvious disinformation network about this. I'm showing an anti-Macron narrative network here, which is a little more subtle, but basically there was like a Macron leaks narrative that was so visible that it got written up in a bunch of independent by a bunch of independent news agencies. And so we're talking about not a particular hashtag here, but narratives associated, narratives that are against the at the time leading candidate Emmanuel Macron, and so there's several of these accounts were obvious. This account is a real person that was involved in the Macron leaks hashtag, one of the first or one of the first releasers of this hashtag, according to the news reports, and so they were active, also active in this anti-Macron narrative network. And so, bottom line is, you look at a bunch of these metrics, these count-based statistics, or topology-based statistics, tweets, retweets, number of followers, and all that stuff. And some of these get I'd say the obvious ones. And just as a sanity check, if we can't get these if we can't get RT America or this account, then we're doing something wrong. So this is not, I would say, this is not like us discovering something. This is a proof of concept against what is publicly known. So the fact that we get this causal inference metric scores these accounts very highly is what we predict and expect. So the fact that it does is confirmation. I'd say the more interesting thing is stuff that is not visible. So there's several accounts here that are quite influential, like an account named Pamela Moore 13. Oh wait, didn't we just see Pamela Moore 13? Yeah, this is the same account that was involved in that disinformation campaign about the shooting in Lynn, local to us. Was very active in the French elections, and also, according to a HIPSI report, was identified as being controlled by Russia's Internet Research Agency. So very high causal impact score. This is a very active account in a bunch of different narratives. So whoever was running this account was earning their salary. Same thing with the 10 GOP account. This is another IRA account that also has a relatively high causal influence score. There's other accounts here. I don't want to allow time for questions and show some more stuff. So there's a bunch of other stories here, but basically, bottom line here is that we have enough experience now with this network causal inference method in this data set and a few others that we have confidence that this is a smart way of identifying which accounts are influential in spreading a particular narrative. And so, pardon me, I'm getting my screen. Oh, there, this is okay. So I'll show this on a couple of other real world IO campaigns. I mentioned the French elections. There was a tax evasion Twitter network, several IO actors. There's a bunch of other stuff going on when you look at a network like this. So basically, this is scored. Colors here are stuff that comes out of the classifier I mentioned. So things that are more red are more IO-like according to the classifier, and things that are larger have a higher influence score according to causal inference. And so here's a big cluster of potential IO actors. So big red means potential IO actor, not just potential IO actor, but influential IO actor and potentially interesting. Then the triangles here are known accounts. There's a bunch of other accounts that are interesting that have not been identified. And then big blue, or pretty much any blue, are potential advocates. And then the rest are potentially vulnerable to the IO narrative that's being spread. And so another way of looking at this space is looking at, you've got these two machine learning based scores, the classifier and the influence. And so if you've got a high classifier score and a high influence score, then you're an influential IO actor. And out of all this space, this is probably the part where you'd want to look first in terms of understanding what's going on. And I'll note that all the interesting accounts in this particular narrative that we've been talking about are in this influential IO actors. Pamela Moore 13, 10 GOP. Here's the Sputnik writer, this time not stuff that she posted on the web, but her Twitter account, another IRA account, Texas Cowboys Rock. So there's a bunch of them in there. And then looked at in this space is if you're not likely to be an IO account but have high influence, then these are your potential advocates. And then if you're part of the larger population, then you're potentially vulnerable to that narrative. And so that's all of interest. And so we've looked at a few different examples. It being COVID, we've been looking at vaccine conspiracy therapy, anti-vaccine conspiracy theories, conspiracies, both related to like the origin of the virus and all the stuff that went on there, all the disinformation about alternate or quack treatments, and specific conspiracy theories like Bill Gates is evil. And so I'll show one here. So here's one network. The same type of structure comes out. There's a cluster of likely IO actors, but based on their automated classifier score in their influence score and target population. And we get comparable, using Twitter statistics, we get comparable precision recall curves like this. And I'd say when you look at stuff that comes out of this classifier and drill down, you get stuff that I think passes the reasonable person test. And another thing I mentioned a couple examples in this talk. There's the 2017 French election. There's the COVID stuff. And if you look at, well, first of all, a lot of these accounts get suspended. So that's another challenge here, especially if you're looking at what's just publicly available like we are. And so if it's suspended, and then you don't get to look at that data. And so, but so a lot of these accounts that were active in the 2017 French election, if they were still active, many of them are now spreading disinformation about COVID. And so again, this is our observation. We're not I'm not trying to identify any of these as necessarily state-sponsored IO account, but a lot of them there's a lot of consistency, across two different disinformation campaigns that's interesting. And so I've been talking a lot about being very online, talking about Twitter, Twitter networks and Twitter data sets. You can also use these network causal inferences in traditional media. And so we have, we're also looking at news media articles on issues that affect the international landscape and treaties. So there's a we looked at one data set that had to do with the U.S. withdrawal from the INF treaty with Russia, and looked at data associated with sentiment analysis with this, and looked at which accounts and which citations in those news accounts may have been influencing others, and came up with a causal network and influence score in news media for across a particular narrative, in this case, the INF treaty cancellation. And so, again, you can, same concepts, but in news media space, you can put together a narrative network and identify which organizations are influential in specific narratives across across a particular network of news outlets. And so here the classification is pro-US and pro-Russia, and TASS is pro-Russia, for example. No surprise there, and turns out to be very influential in the narrative about the U.S. withdrawal from the INF treaty. And so this is an example that we're writing up, and I hope to get out as a preprint soon. So just in summary, like I say, we've applied this in a bunch of different network causal inference in a bunch of different contexts now, and think that it has applications in a bunch of different applications. And so there's, we're hypothesizing activity of an account and spread it in a narrative. We could also hypothesize the impact of particular countermeasures. And so, that's something that we think of as interest, doing this on large graphs is of interest, and also applying this in other domains. I've talked about Twitter networks and news media, but cyber is an obvious one. Epidemiology is an obvious one. But there's a whole bunch of causality on networks is an important thing, and so we think this has wide applications. And so, quick shout out to my team members. Erica, Joe, Danelle, Olga, and Don Rubin. And I won't read my summary slide. I'll got a few minutes for questions. So
at this point, yeah, let's open up for questions. You can raise your hand or put it in the chat. And it seems like our first question is coming from Andy. Andy, I can unmute you. That way you can ask yourself, and certainly if there's a follow-up question, you'd be able to do that.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Andy?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yes. So I was wondering if you conduct your analysis across languages or translate into English first.
Yeah, so in the stuff that we're looking at, we had, it is multilingual. And so it's a truism that we follow, that you always want in NLP, you always want to be working in the source language. And so there's, auto translators have their own. I mean, nowadays it's all it's all some machine learning model anyway, and you don't want the details of that model to get in. So yeah, everything is based on the native language.
I'll go ahead and ask my question. So I think one of the things you brought up was, how this tool might be used. And I guess my question is, who would actually be using this tool? It seems like the government might want to stay out of this a little bit, but alternatively, we have Twitter. And it seems like Twitter has not necessarily been open to sharing their data with researchers or the government in this space. So for me, it's a little bit uncertain of where this gets applied. And I guess the other question is, do you think Twitter could be doing better than what they're doing now?
So yeah, these are like, I'll try. There's some orthogonal questions there. I'll try to address them.
Yes, touch what you want. I mean, I know there's like 5 there.
So axis 1 is, who would use this? And I'd say, I think given the right authorities, that there's absolutely a potential, for the U.S. government to, knowing who's involved in an influence campaign is extremely important, and it could be important domestically. It could be important for allies, and how they do that, and if there's and a lot of this stuff, is governed by the First Amendment and the Fourth Amendment and all the Title V and all that stuff, and so it has to be done within that context. But I think absolutely it's important to and there's an important role for them to play. They're going. This is influence operations is a state-sponsored thing, and so the U.S. is a state. They need to, they represent us. They need to, do stuff to protect us. So within the Constitution. So that's my opinion on that.
For follow-up, could maybe I don't mean to distract, send you off another track, but one thing I thought that was really interesting is this discussion of vulnerable populations and interventions. And again, I think that's sort of aligned with the same sort of, perspective, which is, who would be sort of targeting these folks, right? And what could we possibly do for vulnerable populations? And any just greater discussion on it would be appreciated.
Yeah, so I'd say in that, I mean, that gets into that certainly gets into policy thing, but there's a growing body of research about how things you can do to help stop the spread in the pandemic to vulnerable populations, and so I'd cite research by our colleagues on campus, Dean Eccles and David Rand, and they're all their colleagues who are looking into this. But there are a lot of other people, looking into, what are the can you do cues, like cues based on accuracy and other stuff, and that's that's there. I'd say that's a huge space, and it's also I'd say it's early on, so I'm not going to presuppose an answer, but right. I mean, this is not. I'll just note none of this is new, right? The only thing new here is like it's happening online. There, ads are old. government information campaigns are old. We're all, Uncle Sam, is World War I recruitment. So, this stuff is all very old and is going to continue. And there's, there's an important role for people who, for the government and the private sector in this. And that's a big thorny, right? I could try to speculate, but I don't have confidence that I'll be able to forecast the future on that one.
Are there any other questions from our participants? Well, I'll ask another one. Could you go into a little bit more detail about some of the top features that you guys used in your classifiers?
Yeah, so we just, and this is hard, I come from a signal processing background, so this is still hard for me. So rather than, come up with a model and presuppose what the important features are, we just came up with features that we thought, a feature space that we thought would be, reasonable and might provide, some sort of insight for a model to learn. And a lot of those features are content-based features. So it's just, here's the content, it's text, you tokenize it, you put it into, you vectorize it. And so there's content-based features. There's also account-based features. So, any public metadata that the account reveals about itself, that stuff goes in, how they fit in with the network, there's behavioral features, and we get in our paper on this gets into a huge, we go through in gory detail on what all the features are and what all the account importances are and all all of that. So there's I definitely, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at our PNAS paper, but I'd refer you to there for all the details on feature importances and the huge feature space.
I'll follow up. I'll put out two questions out there, and I'll let you choose which one you want to go after.
Yeah.
So my first question is, are you seeing some of the same accounts operate in different languages or around the world? And the other question, if you want to answer it, is, did you see any sort of high-level executive branch members or affiliated persons that came up as part of the vulnerable population or part of the sphere of influence on these operations?
So yeah, I'll take both of those. So and by the way, I want to be clear, and so I'm a researcher in this area, and so I'm interested, like the technical the technical question that we're interested in pursuing is, can you provide a level of automation for identifying influential IO accounts and demonstrate that in real data? And so there's other questions, and so I have to do that in a professional and ethical way. And so I can't there's a lot of stuff people pulled into this that have nothing to do with it or are just part of it. So I don't so in terms of looking at accounts that were in multiple languages across different, I showed examples of some of those accounts. Some were operating in the French elections, and then some were spreading COVID disinformation in English a few years later. So that definitely exists. And if you get online, there's a bunch of great teams operating in this space that really get down into the details that provide a lot of examples like that. And then, but I'd say we honestly haven't spent a lot of time aside from like, aggregating, a quote vulnerable population, because of the, the focus of the research is we don't, unless there's a really good reason, like research technical reason, we don't want to spend a lot of time like focusing on particular accounts. And I haven't done that, so I don't have I haven't, like I haven't identified that. And I'm probably not going to spend any time on that.
Yeah, we can move forward from that sort of line of thought. I think our last question is going to come from Ravi. Ravi, did you want to?
Yeah. Hi, Dr. Smith. Thank you for the presentation. I noticed this, like the classifiers that you used in your previous paper, like the tree-based addition trees, and then the few slides before the last one that was on transformer models, like particularly BERT and other varieties. Did you see any performance? I believe there is a performance boost going from a tree-based classifier to like a transformer-based classifier. Do you see any other extra information in terms of explainability of these models, like interpretation, why it classifies this particular document or article as or this user as a influencer or a bad influencer? Like, is there any explanation on it?
So we're using transformer models for a lot of stuff and looking into them, using them here. And I'd say, by the way, for the narrative, we are doing dirt simple things for narrative. So you're looking at mallet bag of words based results there. And so there are definitely clever things you can do. And the reason is, like I said before, is we're looking for a proof of concept of like setting a baseline of some basic smart thing you could do. And so we have seen some improvements for narrative detection using transformer models, but I haven't actually quantified that, written that up, or even I'd say like that's more of a practical, like if it's not broken, don't fix it, and if it's working, move on, right? Okay. And then for explainability, that gets in. So tree classifiers provide some degree of explainability because they give future importances, and you can follow things through the tree and look at those importance, and so I'd say the degree of explainability that is coming through, we simply inherit because we're using this particular random forest classifier, and I'm familiar with research on explainability, and one can always do better in that space. But I honestly haven't dug down into give me. I mean, it would be nice to have a more higher level explanation for why something is important, rather than just, hey, these features are big. And does that make sense? Well, maybe.
Yeah, we have something maybe we could, after our research, we could share later.
Okay, yeah, I'd be very interested in that. Thank you.
And another question, somewhat unrelated topic with respect to interpretation and explainability. We also have this seminar going on with the class we Dr. Vela teaches. I'm teaching assistant in that class. Is there any terms of ethical and moral or legal constraints that when we work upon this social media research to be clear?
Sorry, can I repeat I'm getting a little echo, and so I just want to make sure I get you asked about legal issues with the social media data?
Yeah, the ethical, moral, and legal issues in using social media research and collecting social media data. And if you can share some information on it, that would be great.
So, this circles around to Adon's question about Twitter. So Twitter has a public API. They have a user agreement. I sign the public API, or I sign the user agreement and use the public API. So the legal issues are follow what you said you do in the user agreement, and that's their right. That's their model is they provide, they get benefit in a lot of ways from that API. And so, and they do open it up for researchers and have, there's rules that allow me to distribute, some of this, and we have distribute, part of our paper is a GitHub repo with some of that data in it that Twitter allows. So, so those, I'd say it's, it's publicly available information. There's a legal framework, and you can do a lot with it. And so I'd say that I mean, it gets back to like, could Twitter do better? What are they doing? Well, I'd say like first of all, I have to acknowledge Twitter here is all of these insights and research was done on the back of Twitter providing that public API, being able to like, and if we couldn't publish about it, then, that raises that question, but we're allowed to do that. So that's great. The Twitter elections integrity set, we built our classifier based on it. There's a lot of great data there. So they're doing, Twitter is doing a lot. And so, it gets in a larger, and I wouldn't want to call out, Twitter necessarily because, and this is, this is, this is me, speculating, based on my own, own experience is, I think, there's just, there's a fundamental conflict between the social media business model and selling ads and getting people on and letting that run and controlling disinformation. So I view that I don't have a solution to that. And like I mentioned the congressional stuff last week is sure, I think there's a ton more the social media companies could be doing. But also, I'd say that, it's my opinion that there's both as, the social media companies and as a country, the government, and as society in general, we just haven't done a lot about this problem. And it's a lot of low-hanging fruit out there. And I think that, I just think that, it's First Amendment, free and open society. We like to speak our minds. It's always, the internet is always going to promote this stuff. And I'm not sanguine that you're going to find like a bunch of set of easy rules or changing things up to make this issue go away. So I think it would be good, and what we should do is address the low-hanging fruit stuff. If there's stuff that we can do, and keep all that character, we should absolutely be doing it. But thinking about the counter game, there's a bunch of counters that you could come in and make it that much more challenging. So there's several moves ahead, and that's.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Smith.
All righty, so we're gonna wrap it up. Let's, thank you, Dr. Smith, as well for coming to speak with us today. We have a number of folks who wanted to watch your presentation as well, who couldn't make it. So hopefully we can make that shareable at some point. And I do want to remind everybody, we'll have Todd Helmus from RAND coming to speak next week on countering violent extremism in the military. If you're not part of our email list, or you know somebody who would like to be added, you can email Ravi at, he's one of our graduate students here who is managing the seminars, at rk@knights.ucf.edu. All right, thanks guys, have a good one. And thank you again, Dr. Smith. We appreciate it. Have a good day.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed this. Appreciate the invitation again. Take care, everyone.
All right, bye-bye.